Not only does Yahweh care about those on the margin of society, He has also asked us to show our love for Him by taking responsibility for the marginalized. How should we respond to the less fortunate in our society? We're exploring the ancient book of Deuteronomy to obtain guidelines to help us in our daily living. In this series, we examine what it means to love God and to love others. In line with loving God, our key text is found in Deuteronomy 10:19, and it says, "Therefore love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt." Centuries before, the Lord told Abraham, "Know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them for 400 years." Though his descendants were to be afflicted or in slavery for 400 years, in Genesis 17, God changes his name from Abram, exalted father, to Abraham, father of a multitude. And he reassures him of his promise by changing his name and reminding him of his promise. He says to Abram, whom he now calls Abraham in Genesis 17:8, "Also, I give to you and your descendants after you the land in which you are a stranger, all the land of Canaan, as an everlasting possession, and I will be their God." Now, in Acts 13:17, Paul tells of Abraham's descendants' experience as strangers in the land of Egypt. He says, "The God of this people, Israel, chose our fathers and exalted the people when they dwelt as strangers in the land of Egypt. And with an uplift arm, he brought them out of it." In the early chapters of Exodus, we find the dramatic story of the Israelites, Abraham's descendants' redemption. In Exodus 15:13, God is exalted for his mighty work. It says, "You in your mercy have led forth the people whom you have redeemed. You have guided them in your strength to your holy habitation." And we see the salvation of the Lord in Exodus 14:13, when God ends the Israelites' problem with Egypt. Here it says, "And Moses said to the people, 'Do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see again no more forever." God redeemed the Israelites from Egyptian slavery, and he saved them from the Egyptians. The incident in Egypt has been recorded for future generations as a symbol, a type of the redemption and salvation we have been given in Christ Jesus. Thus, in Deuteronomy 10:19, which says, "Therefore love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt," is God's message to Israel then and his people today. He wants them to remember where they had been and what they have been. He was reminding them that they had been strangers in another land. Just as Abraham's descendants, we were strangers in another land. We were slaves to sin, but God has set us free. In other words, God is saying, remember, you also have been in the margins of society. You have been outcast and even slaves. You were once at the mercy of those who were stronger than you. You too experienced their abuse and mistreatment. God had acknowledged Israel as his chosen nation, a kingdom of priests, according to Exodus 19:6, which says, "And ye shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel." And though there were some differences between his people and the strangers among them in regards to religious services and beliefs, God had called Israel to do a special work. God had called his people today to do a special work as well. When it comes to human rights, God expects them to treat the strangers, the widows, the orphans with the same fairness, respect, and justice as the Israelites expected for themselves when they were in the same condition. He expects no less from his people today. Matthew 7:12 in short restates what the Lord was telling ancient Israel and us today about how we are expected to treat the weak among us. It says, "Therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, you also do to them, for this is the law and the prophets." God's instruction to Israel about how they were to treat the outcast was not the norm in ancient Israel. Neither is it the norm in our world today. In ancient Israel, the outcasts were often treated no better than animals, and sometimes even worse. How does our society treat the outcast? But nevertheless, God's people are expected to be different. They were expected and are expected to be a light to the world. That difference is based on the desires of the God we serve, on how we worship him, and it is based on the religious system given to them by the true and living God. Their kind treatment of the marginalized and the outcast was to be a powerful statement to the world of the supremacy of their God and of their faith in him. For in reality, this was the reason they had been called to be God's special people. Their existence and how they lived were to be a witness to the world of the difference between the true and living God and the many false gods. This is the same reason for which the people of God today have been called. God expects them to love those he loved and be of assistance to the poor, the needy, the outcast, and the marginalized in our society. How serious is God about how we treat the poor and the outcast? Find out in the next lesson, Part 5, Judge Righteously.